Hello, and welcome to this video, which is going to be discussing the benefits and comparisons in a way, and the negative things about a modular synth versus a regular synth. By a regular synth, I mean a standard keyboard, and the audio path is set, and pretty much everything else is up for grabs depending on the model you buy. They can be quite simple. They can have built-in sequencers. They often have arpeggiators and effects and everything else in, and some have patch bays for, and even could be semi-modular, which we'll discuss later. But essentially, the box you buy is fixed. It's not upgradable. It's not changeable. You obviously can get better at using it and learn little quirks and things that you can use to your benefit or you enjoy to use in your music or whatever. But you're basically buying a finished product. A modular is almost exactly the opposite. It very much, you've got to spec it from the word go. My first modular synth I tried to build. And I say try because the company actually went bust this is in the late 80s, early 90s, and it actually went bust. And my whole thing was I was building an adjunct to my Korg MS-20 synthesizer, to enhance that one's features. So in effect, I was starting off with what is now called a semi-modular synth. It was a synth with a patch bay, and I was trying to expand it. However, in recent times, all my modular experience has been with the Tangible Waves AE modular, and I'll talk more about why I picked this particular system in a while. Just to go into a little bit of my experience, I bought my first synth, which is the aforementioned Korg MS-20 in 1984, and I've still got it. I'm going to include it in the video, and I've got what I'd consider a pretty good studio, a pretty large studio now, because I've kept nearly all the gear I've bought over the years. I actually had to purge in 2024 and got rid of a few bits of gear, and actually just still selling off the last few bits of it. I've got a Akai hardware sampler I've decided can go. I was going to keep it, but then I just don't use it anymore because my core of my studio is a Akai MPC, and part of what they do is sampling, so I just don't need this Akai sampler. Anyway, I'll have to investigate how much it's worth and stuff like that, but I digress. So that's my experience, and my AE modular I purchased about 5, maybe 6 years ago now. I purchased my first part of my system 5-6 years ago now. The whole thing with modular, and I think it's one of its benefits actually, if you have that mindset, is that you can, it's infinitely expandable. It can grow where you want it to grow, and I think that's the mindset you've got to go into it with. It's not a fixed thing. It's not only going to do this one thing for your music. It's actually a whole mini experience within itself, and that's very much what I've found. And I'll discuss more about the AE modular when why I chose it and so on, going further forward. I suppose that ties in to really the first part of the video, which is, the biggest thing I would say that's against modular is it's less immediate. Especially in this day and age with lots of sounds and even riffs and bass lines even, and drum patterns being provided on hardware, software in particular. It is not instant gratification. When you first purchase it won't even make a noise. You've got to put some cables in it and got to understand where to put those cables so that it actually makes a noise. But the other side of that is I think it's brilliant for learning synthesis from the ground up, or certainly basic analog synthesis. There are digital modules out there, but that's a whole nother topic which won't be covered in this video. So I actually think for beginners it's a really good place to start. I also think it's a really good adjunct to quite a few studio systems, because you can mould it to what you need it to be. If you want it to be more of an effects unit, do you want it to do percussion, it can be the system you can construct to what you want it to do. And that's actually one of the biggest reasons my AE modular is still evolving 5-6 years later. Is it was a percussion synth for a while, at least part of it was, and I've got in effect 2 regular synth voices in it. I've got 2 basically independent synthesizers in my rack, and then I've got loads of other modules. So modular never ends. You can't grow out of it. You may find that you move on, a bit like with gear in your studio, or you decide you don't like a particular guitar or whatever. You will find there's modules you don't need, but it won't cost you as much as a regular piece of gear, unless you're buying one of the boutique systems. There are other modulars out there, and I'm not particularly talking about Eurorack, although that's not cheap either. There's some other modular systems out there which are definitely not cheap, more for collectors than actual musicians, I believe. But anyway, but the modules can be sold on, just like gear can be sold on, so you don't have to lose all the money. But also things keep changing. One of the things that sort of blew my mind really, and made me want to grow my modular system, was that you can. When you buy a new module, it does its own thing, but it actually impacts the modules you've already got. It can enhance their capabilities and give you more options. Whether it's a musical option, of course, is entirely another issue, but it's this is one thing I've really found, especially with some of the interface modules, where they can alter and adjust CVs or change triggers and that sort of thing. Those in particular can really change things quite dramatically and give you ideas and thoughts you never use. And I've actually written pieces of music around where a riff I've almost come up accidentally on my modular synth. One of the things I would say modular is definitely for is for experimenters. If you're not actually after writing and composing pieces of music, and you just want to enjoy the process of making music and seeing what happens if you try something or do something, modular is absolutely perfect for you. There's what I call the bleep and bloop brigade, and there's an awful lot, and there's some very expensive systems out there that all they're doing is going bleeps and bloops. Doesn't do anything for me, but the person that's done this video, released this track, whatever, has enjoyed making it, and great for them, and quite often they do sell. But I always feel it's a waste in a way, because there's so much more they can do. It's true of other systems, but particularly true of the AE modular system, is that the electronics DIY and design brigade can have a whale of a time, and there is a very active DIY community with the AE modular in particular. And you can actually buy modules from some of these guys that are not doing this for a living. It's a hobby. It can be frustrating sometimes because you actually have to wait a while for the module, because the person has to build this module for you around their regular job. From the experimenter side, but also from the musician side, one of the biggest things modular will give you over most regular synths is that the amount of things you can get to warp, alter, divide, multiply, adjust, twiddle with, it is quite often almost infinite. You almost guarantee the one parameter you want to meddle with is one you can't, but there's quite often ways around it because of the way you patch the modules together. And some particularly more expensive mono synths and some few poly synths have got really complicated modulation matrices, but you still can't suddenly decide necessarily to see what happens if you put a VCO into the output of a VCA sort of thing. You can do that, and you can get some really strange and unexpected results, which might be musical and they might not. But you can have a way of a time with it. This is, and the semi-modulars get into this area. And when I say semi-modular, I'm almost meaning any regular synth that's got a patch bay on it. Pretty much all semi-modular means is that there is an audio path that's set so that you can make a noise relatively easily, but it's got a patch bay on it and you can change things. And you might even be able to change the audio path depending on the design. And, there's some really nice semi-modulars out there. Behringer in particular spring to mind with having quite a lot of, a huge range of rack mounting synths with patch bays, and some of them are excellent synths. And personally, I'd highly recommend the Neutron, for instance, and that's Eurorack compatible if you ever decide to go down that route. One area of synthesis that I would say modular is less useful for, I wouldn't say impossible, but certainly you'd have to spend a lot of money to be able to do it, is for polyphonic, for playing chords, because you have to have a module, each sort of module for each sound, and there are people out there that do this, but to me it's not ideal. A polyphonic synth is actually perfect for doing what you want to do. You want to keep the same sound, but you want to play chords, and so you only have to adjust one set of parameters. But conversely, where a modular really wins is multi-timbral. So this is playing more than one sound at once. And my system now, which I'll show you in the video at some point, because I'm doing the audio first, and I'm going to do the video afterwards, is my system. I've actually got potentially, I've got two areas that are two separate synth voices, and they can do quite a lot. Then I've got at least 2 or 3 lots of percussion available, and you could argue more if I separated out the drum sounds, because I have one module that's got drum sounds on it. And there's also other sound sources, and you can make some of the filters self-oscillate so they can make noises. So I would say potentially there could be as many as 20 different sounds available on my A modular if I really wanted to go down that route. I have used 6 in one go if you include drums. This is much more unusual for a regular synth, and in fact I actually think it doesn't work very well in most synths. The only time I've ever found multi-timbral synths useful was early on when I didn't have much gear, and so I could do the bass line and on a synth, and then I could play chords over the top. I used to use an old Roland D20 to do that, and that was the only time I really ever bothered with multi-timbral. Once I had more gear, I didn't even need to do that. So to me, multi-timbral just means you can't have another. You haven't got another synthesizer available. One of the biggest areas where a regular synth will win is price. Especially in this day and age, mid 2020s, it's incredible the value for money on gear. Even ignoring Behringer, if you just look at the others, I'd even argue that some of the what I call boutique synths, like the Sequentials and Oberheims of this world, and Moog, the expensive American manufacturers, is there. If you compare the prices from the 70s and 80s to the gear now and what they can do, it's just mind-blowing. And especially the low end of the market. There's the quality of synths you can pick up for under £500 is just incredible. And like I say, what they're able to do. And I'm not talking about multi-timbral and everything else. It's just the sheer quality of synth. One of the best synths I think is from this century is the Novation Ultra Nova, not available anymore unfortunately, but it's an incredibly versatile synth with an amazing arpeggiator, and I think I paid £350 for it because it was when they discontinued it, but it was new, and I think my first polysynth was a Casio CZ101, which I do still have and I still use. And I paid, I think it was the end of the late 80s, and I paid £300 for that. And you compare the two, and it's not chalk and cheese. I mean, they're actually different synths, but the capabilities of the new Supernova over the CZ101 are just, it's stratospheres apart. So anyway, enough of waxing lyrical about how lucky we are living in the modern era if you're an electronic musician. Really, the emphasis there was about is how cheap you can get a synthesizer these days. Conversely, a modular synth won't be cheap. I have to say, you don't have to spend a lot of money at once, especially once you've got the case. I mean, I suppose this is where I could dive into why I chose the A modular. I've always liked the idea of modular synths. You can pick and choose the best module for, the best, whether you could have this filter or whatever. But the price just always put me off, restricted my capabilities of doing it. And so even with Eurorack, Eurorack's probably the single, well, it's almost by default the standard system now for modular synthesizers. It's a pretty good standard. It's not perfect because different manufacturers don't stick to exactly the same voltages and etc. on IOs and this sort of thing. And I think I've seen problems on forums where they don't even need quite the same power supply, so which doesn't sound very good. But generally speaking, Eurorack, you've got an infinite number of modules, and I do mean infinite, especially if you've got the budget. But that's the thing, is when I looked into it, buying a case, and this is just a case to put the modules in, no keyboard, no nothing, just to buy a case was a few £100. I could buy a full polysynth for less money than this case would cost, and all this case was the power supply and the box to hold the modules. I haven't got to make any noise yet. The modules themselves, I actually don't think are bad value for money. But again, if you look at, I'm going to mention Behringer again. The Behringer has got some Eurorack modules out now, mid 2025. And you look at their price, and then you look at the price of their cheaper synths, especially things like the Edge, and I've forgotten what the other ones are called, but they've got these little desktop sequencer modules, synths with a built-in sequencer, and if you're spending less money on a piece of gear that will do loads, and it's already got its power supply and everything else, so it's really not about money. It's about, do you want what modular can give you? And that's really part of what this video hopes to help you with. So just nipping back to semi-modular, is it a good halfway house? Well, unfortunately, I'm not going to give you a straight answer. I personally would say no, because I think if you are you thinking about wanting all the benefits of modular, you won't get them from a semi-modular. Yes, you'll get patching, and that is part of it, but it's not all of it by any stretch of the imagination. And I would suggest anybody gets a semi-modular because it is fun, mucking about with where the signal goes and putting CVs somewhere else. And and I'm not biased just because my first ever synth was a semi-modular, as in the big chord now. It does give you more options, particularly if you've got other gear that will connect to it. I mean, I've got a little part of my studio is some Behringer semi-modulars and the Paul White Malevolent, and there's some, I can't remember what else is there now, so I'm just looking over because I'm sat in my studio. Oh, Mi MS-20, of course, sorry. They're now, they're near each other, so they can be patched together. I don't do it very often, because quite often if I'm in the studio, I'm actually writing a piece of music, not just sitting fiddling with my gear. So, if you particularly want to make music, and particularly if you want chords, obviously, then, as I said previously, I think you're probably better off getting a regular polysynth. I wouldn't worry about it. You'll get better bang for your bucks. So you decide modular is for you. What's next? Well, the first thing I'd say to any person going to spend a reasonable amount of money on anything is do some research. I spent a lot of time, not quite the same subject, but I spent a lot of time researching electric cars before I decided to take the plunge and buy one. And I'm just about 6 months into my ownership now, and I have to say I'm over the bloody moon. And a lot of that is because I did the research, found out what the pitfalls were, and really this is what everybody talks about is range anxiety, and what were the benefits. And the benefits are, I might actually do a video about one day, because I would recommend anybody to get an electric car. There's very few people it wouldn't suit. Anyway, I digress. So you're doing your research, and my research was actually almost accidental, because as I say, I'd fancied a modular, and I actually did used to own a small modular system. It was actually a Digisound 80, it was called. Those of the older might remember it, particularly in the UK. I think it was in Europe as well, but I had a box. I had the box and the power supply, and I had 3, maybe 4 modules when the company went bust and stuff wasn't available anymore. And it cost me a lot of money. I mean, I'd done it gradually through my student years and my early years of working when I didn't have that much money available. And so it was quite disappointing when it all collapsed in a heap. And I did actually sell that off because I was moving house and just didn't have room to transport it. It was one of the few things I did sell off, but it wasn't that useful to me because it hadn't got anywhere near what I wanted it to do. But anyway, there was this one desire to have a modular in the back of my mind. I have these images of the big Moog systems from the 70s, sat on the stage with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and later on Mark Shreve in particular. I forgot the name of his band, Redshift, that was it, sorry, it was Redshift he performed as when he was doing his AE modular. And, so you have these sort of things in your mind, but, that was never going to be practical in my life, so even if I had the money. But I had kept an eye on Eurorack and, the Deepfer website in particular. I was I used to go and drool at every now and again, but I just couldn't justify spending that sort of money. If I had that sort of money available, I was better off buying another polysynth or a new mixer or whatever it was. But almost by accident, and I honestly can't tell you now how I found out about the Tangible Waves AE modular, and it was actually on Kickstarter. So this is before it became a regular product, and it just ticked all my boxes. It was a reasonable price. It wasn't a fixed system. You could literally, being a proper modular, move the modules if you wanted to put the modules in completely the wrong order. To how you would do them on a regular synth, or you could do what you want, and it just and the size, it's about, I would say it's about 2/3 the size of Eurorack. It might even be a little bit smaller, not having seen a Eurorack system for a long time in the flesh. It like I say, it ticked all the boxes, so I decided to take the chance, and I bought a one-rack system that could hold 16 units. My current system, and it is due to evolve and change slightly because I've just ordered a new case from Tangible Waves. I've got a 2x20, so the old 40 modules, and I've got another 2x16 case, but that case isn't full. It will be when I've finished my latest reinventing of my system, but it's but at the moment, that's where I am. But when I say it can hold these two 2x20 racks, that's a total of 80 modules. Some modules are only 1 unit wide, some are 2 wide, and I've got one that's 4 wide, and so that's why they're units. And Eurorack will talk about the same thing. They'll look about units of width. I think it's like 1¼ inches or 3 centimeters. It's that sort of area of a Eurorack. That's what a Eurorack unit is, something like that. The size helped. The other thing, the reason I picked it was because it had a MIDI in. The master unit, which is the power supply, and also had a MIDI in, and converted that MIDI into a gate and CV onto a bus. So that the Eurorack, the bus, is just power. If you want to do anything, you've got to connect cables. With the AE modular, you've got a bus cable that's got the MIDI trigger, the MIDI clock, and note CV, note CV, well, it becomes a CV on the system. And I've forgotten what else is on the bus. There's the power, obviously. I'm sure there's something else on the bus. But anyway, there's several things on the bus cable that runs behind the modules. And I very much wanted that. My studio has been built around MIDI since probably 1992, I would guess. So that was a huge boon that it was geared up for MIDI, and I could just use one of my keyboards into the MIDI in. And what I currently do most of the time is I have MIDI going into it from a keyboard, and I actually run the sequencers. I trigger the sequencers from my Akai MPCs, because the current crop of Akai MPCs have CV gates out, and they can be used straight to the AE modular with no problem. So brilliant. I didn't know that at the time, but I knew I could trigger the AE modular from the gear I had at the time. So and it's actually one of the reasons I changed my MPCs to the latest ones, because of the CV gate availability on them, and it's been a great. So I got my first 1x16 rack, and this gets to one of the things I love about modular systems, is that then you can change the system to suit where you want it to go. You could build a polyphonic synth with all the same modules, and I have several racks of the same things, and especially now since there's a whole batch of new MIDI control modules coming out. It's called IMDI within the AE modular, and you could actually build a polyphonic synthesizer in modular if you wanted to, and it wouldn't be outrageously expensive. It wouldn't be cheap, but it wouldn't be outrageously expensive, because AE modular is a hell of a lot cheaper than Eurorack. Having said that, my AE modular is now my single most expensive gear in the studio, and that's with me having an Akai MPCX. But of course, unlike the MPCX where I had to pay for it in one go, I've bought these modules gradually over the last 6 years. And the other thing is that as I say, it's grown mostly because I've said I'd like to be able to do this with it. There's been a few times I've just gone, ooh, I like that module, as you do, but you get gas for modules instead of gear, so it could be sort of mass, I suppose. And and there's quite a few modules like that you would never get rid of, well, yes, I think that's the best way of putting it. But there's very few modules I actually have decided don't suit me at all. I have sold off about 5, I think, something like that. Right, but the vast majority of modules I've kept, because even if don't use them very much, I'm using them. To just sort of move on from why I picked the A modular. Everybody's musical journey is different. Whether you want to try and become professional at it, whether you just want to enjoy it, whether you want to play live, whether you enjoy composing, or you like sound design, whatever it is you want to do, it's your musical journey, and it's got to be something you enjoy. And one of the things I have really enjoyed the last 5 years, even though I haven't actually created that much music with it, is the A modular, and there's a few reasons for that. I would say probably the biggest one is that it hasn't been the actual technicalities of it in terms of making another synthesizer in my studio. In fact, that wasn't really necessary at all. I've got plenty of synths, but the user forum is excellent. It's not as busy as it used to be, unfortunately, but a lot of people have moved to Discord. There's a very active Discord community, but I just can't do it. It cooks my brain. But I've had some really good conversations, and even gone and met some of the people in real life that I've met on the forum. And then one of the bestest things is that a guy in Australia and I have actually made music together. And the first album we did, that's available on Bandcamp if you're interested, we actually did almost purely with the A modular. Well, not 100%, but it was probably, I'd say, 80% plus. And then the second albums we've started, because we put each track on as we go. The second album we've started, but that's not sticking to A modular too much. It's all over the place. I think one track is 100% A modular, and then the rest there's at least one that hasn't got any on at all. So. But part of what it's done as well is got me into electronics. I've always been interested in electronics, partly because of liking synthesizers and the fun of what electronics can do. I messed with reel-to-reel tape recorders when I was a teenager, and dismantling. I had an old record player and I dismantled and had it play at different speeds because you could fiddle with it and that sort of thing. And the AE sort of got me back into that. I knew what a capacitor was, I know what a resistor is, and I didn't even know what they do. But I couldn't, I hadn't made electronics kits or anything since I was a teenager. And I've done that since getting the AE modular. I've built 3-4 kits, I guess, something like that. And I've actually even built 2 modules from scratch from a design that a user put on the forum. And very pleased with them. I had to source all the components myself. That was a saga, but the actual, once you got the components, it was just a bit like assembling a kit, really. So that's an unexpected bonus part of my journey, if you like, and I have enjoyed that side of it. It's not that I'm heading anywhere near designing my own modules or anything like that. I've just found it interesting. I think that covers really all the areas I wanted to cover in modular. But the conclusion, I suppose, is where we are. Just to emphasise what I said a minute or two ago, there's no right or wrong. It's what you want to do on your music/electronics journey in this particular case. Because I think even with the Eurorack, I don't think there's many DIY things, but there's certainly, as far as I know, there's certainly lots of possibilities out there to do with that as well. If you need instant gratification and are used to presets and even provided melodies, etc., with software and so on, it's unlikely you'll get into modular synths. They are not going to give you much of the instant gratification. It's very easy to make little or no noise or horrible noise with a modular. It's actually quite an art to make a nice noise with it. If you like to experiment and you want to learn about electronics and you love physical instruments, you're actually having something physical in front of you, whether it's a control surface or a guitar or whatever, a modular synth would be a very good area to play with, because again, there's no reason a modular synth can't be connected to other controllers. It doesn't have to be a keyboard or sequencer, or you have a sequencer module. There's a guy in the UK I think he's on YouTube, called Gavin something, that actually does use an AE modular live while he plays guitar and stuff. So highly recommended if you want to experiment and fiddle, and especially for relatively low cost. So if you coming at it, if you're a composer, it might be a bit of a question, but certainly if you want to learn about synthesis, I would highly recommend going down the modular route. Part of the reason I say this about struggling if you're a composer is because I've actually struggled in my studio to incorporate the AE modular system into my main songwriting process. I'm getting better at it, partly because I've adjusted things to make it easier to incorporate it. One of the things I did recently was I bought a very small case, what they call a V case. It's the same size as a Korg Volca. But that's a little box that I actually keep permanently wired connected to my MPC X, so that it's there all the time, it's ready to go, and it's going to make a noise if I tell it to, from the MPC, whereas the regular one, the regular main rack, I've got to put cables in and everything else, and that's helped a little bit, and I've done 2 songs like that already. I've had a couple of issues with noise, to be honest, over the years, but I've eliminated that to a large degree by the way I patch, and there's part of the reason I've ordered this new case is that I'm actually going to reduce the number of connections, and I'm also intending to put some shielding in, basically aluminium foil, and see if that'll help with the noise a little bit as well. And I'd actually do put a noise gate on. I know quite a few people that record the AE modular, and there's a lot of AE recordings out there. The user forum does an annual album called Ether Waves for a start. They're available on Bandcamp, but quite a few of them record to Audacity, I think it is. I think that's the program, but I'm sure all the programs do it too, where you can actually, if you do a bit with no music at the beginning, it learns what the background noise is, and then it'll eliminate that from the rest of the recording. That's how a lot of people get around the noise. And I'm not saying the noise is horrendous by any stretch. And like I say, I know people that have used the AE modular live, and there are lots of recordings out there. But it's just something to be aware of. That it can be a problem. And like I say, I pretty much got around it with my system. Part of it was getting rid of one particular module, interestingly enough. Whether mine was faulty or whatever, I don't know. I just didn't want to investigate. I didn't worry about it. I just sold it on. But the other thing as well is that it's having an idea you want to use it for. If I want a melody sound, for instance, lead line sound, it's very quick and easy to nip onto a plugin on the MPCX and just use that. You have to make a conscious choice that I am going to use a synthesizer for this sound, and then I have to make the conscious choice that I want to do this on the AE modular. So actually, basically, that doesn't happen because it interrupts my flow too much. So you have to do it the other way around. You have to find a nice sound you want to use, and then go from there. So you find ways around it. And like I say, there's a few pieces I've written, and there's actually one of my EP mini album things on my own band name on Patterns of Life on Bandcamp. I actually did a mini album that is. That was totally started off because of the AE modular, and when I first got it, it's the Galilean. It's about the Galilean moons, the 4 moons, And the reason that all happened was I got this really funky riff going on the AE modular. This was my original 1x16 system that I just had to do something with, and that happily those sort of accidents still happen. I think I've done 2 or 3 pieces like that, and the last few years, including this year, I have done a track for the Ether Waves album where it is just the AE modular. Obviously, it gets easier as you get a bigger system, but it's but you've still got to have the idea about where you're going to go. If you would like me to go into more detail on my AE setup, obviously there will be footage on the video, but if you'd like me to discuss more about this side of things, this is a possibility for a future studio video. But I'd leave you with this thought. I could, bearing in mind I've got a fairly large studio, I could just make music with my Hakai and PCX, and I have a few of my recent tracks is purely MPCX, but I don't just do that. Why? Okay, thanks for watching. Bye.